Escalating conflict between Israel and Iran that's being fought on the ground and over the skies of Syria. Just the last 48 hours have seen an airstrikes reportedly hitting Iranian military targets in Syria. The firing from Syria of an Iranian missile intercepted by the Iron Dome system in full view of crowds at Israel's Mount Hermon ski resort. More Israeli airstrikes in response to that, but this time in exceptional conditions, carried out in broad daylight and openly claimed by Israel.
And today, this statement to the Iranian state media from that country's commander of its air force: "We're ready for the decisive war that will bring about Israel's disappearance." So are Israel and Iran heading for that more decisive conflict? Well, joining us is Colonel in the Reserves Miri Eisen. She served as deputy head of the IDF Combat Intelligence and as an advisor to former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. And Miri, it does look like some of these red lines are being pushed pretty far. Are we escalating to a more decisive conflict between Israel and Iran there?
I think we're already in it. The question is what we're expecting. Are we expecting now full-scale war between Israel and Iran, or are we right now in that confrontation over Syrian territory, specifically on Iranian presence in Syrian territory? Israel has been preempting for years now. We've been acting for years now. What's changed is that now we are openly claiming it.
So let's talk about that difference. We heard that earlier. Both the Israeli military coming out on Twitter saying these are the targets we struck, including Iranian targets. Then the Israeli Prime Minister following it up with a statement on those strikes. What do you think it means that Israel has officially ended its long-standing policy of ambiguity?
It's interesting that when it comes to Iran, we haven't been as ambiguous as we were, let's say, with Hezbollah. In February last year, after Iran launched the drone against us, after we downed it, we also, but only afterwards, said that it had been us who had intercepted. I think that what we're doing right now has a lot to do with the kind of war that goes along with the other war, the war over the hearts and minds. We need to be very clear right now. Israel is not against Syria. Israel is not against the Syrian people. Israel is not against the Russians. Israel is against the Iranian and the different Iranian subgroups like Hezbollah that are situated now in the area of Syria. And we need to say that openly. We need to claim that openly to do that differentiation. We want the Russians to help the Syrians to get the Iranians out. We have to say we're targeting the Iranians and not anybody else.
But how convincing will that argument especially be for Russia, especially if Israel runs the risk of, again, letting the Russians get in the crossfire between it and Iran?
I'm not so worried about the crossfire. I'm worried about the fact that in its own way, we've brought Russia in because Russia is the one who supplies lots of the weapons or even all the weapons to Syria, not so much to Iran. But yesterday, in the side of the different attacks and today, in addition, we have Russian air defense systems being fired by Syrians against Israel, and we're doing well against them. That in its own way is a slap in the face for Russia. They're the ones who want to go out and say their weapons are really good. They're the ones who give them. And Israel is showing that that's not true. It's definitely a slippery slope. But having said that, we do have to make that clear differentiation. We're not doing this against Russia, certainly not against the Syrian people. This is against the Iranian presence that have in the last 3 years based themselves all over Syria, not just in the Damascus area.
Those public statements, though, make a risk of taking things in the other direction, because there is this sort of notion here in the Middle East of saving face. And when Israel comes out and says very clearly what it's doing and who's striking, that sort of puts Iran, for example, in a corner.
I'm with you on this one, Nurit. I actually think that the fact that we have always been ambiguous is because we don't want to do in the face, hi, it was us. We always want to give the capability of allowing the other side to act as if it wasn't us. We haven't done so this time. In its own way, you're making a strong statement. I think that what Israel is trying to say is watch out. I don't think that we control all of the elements. But I do think at this stage along the way that we're trying to make something very clear to the world. Look at this. This is without anybody else. This is independently Israel. This isn't anybody else doing so. We are openly acting against the Iranian presence inside Syria.
One sort of follow-up to that involves another player we don't see as much these days, and that's the U.S. in Syria. We heard the Syrians coming out today saying Israel would never act in this way without explicit American support. Do you think, especially from your roles, senior roles in the Israeli military, military, that the U.S. support has a big role in what we're seeing now in Syria?
Actually, no. I think that when it comes to these sort of decisions, Israel makes these security type of decisions on our own. In the past, when it started to come out about the Israeli attack against the nuclear facility in Syria in 2007 that was discussed here like a year ago, those are the kind of decisions that were made without the United States, and perhaps they were told about them afterwards. We make security decisions that we think are at the heart of our security without asking anybody. I'd ask a different question about the timing right now that we're doing in that sense, these attacks right now. But at the end, I'm sitting and looking at this build-up inside inside Syria of Iranian forces, and if we don't act now, we're not going to be able to change this afterwards.
And when you say act now, how far is Israel going to have to go? I mean, we heard Gadi Eisenkot, the outgoing chief of staff, saying Israel's hundreds, 1,000 strikes. At what point does Israel have to take action? Could even involve ground forces. What would it really take to deter Iran?
I think that there's a big difference between these air attacks and between any kind of ground activity. It isn't that the Iranian forces are on our border, so there's a really big difference in that kind of sense. We've been acting all over Syria. According to international press, I mean, up in Aleppo, down by the sea, that whole aspect of what's happened, it's all over the place. I think that it's about pressure. It's making sure that they know that we're there. It's making sure that they don't feel comfortable. It's making sure that their hosts, the Syrians, understand that they have something to lose. To help, perhaps, in its own odd way, the Syrians stand up and say, listen, you guys are on our territory and you're bringing a different kind of war here. Leave.
I want to jump back and pick out one word from what you said, timing. Why is timing so important for Israel right now?
Because when we look around right now, really, the war is towards its end. It hasn't ended, by the way. I am going to remind everybody that horrific war and the Syrian war inside Syria, there's still lots of things going on there, and it's still going to continue. But the Iranians over the last 3 years have very gradually built up this whole buildup. And if we right now allow them to just keep on building that up, then you can't get them out afterwards. It's kind of that similarity in any other place where you're inside a country and then you're there for years. Israel is very, very against any kind of physical presence of the Iranians on Syrian territory. They're not there to help the Syrians. They're not there to help the Syrian people. They are building these bases to attack Israel, period.
All right, Colonel in the Reserves, Mary Eisen.